Welcome to the next episode of The Hidden Switch. Today our guest is Emily Chang. She is the Chief Commercial Officer of Chagee, the Chinese premium tea brand listed on the US Stock Exchange since April 2025. And now the company operates over 7,000 tea houses across 8 countries. Emily brings us 26 years of experience at iconic brands from P&G to Apple, Starbucks China, and more. She is also a best-selling author and has delivered 4 TEDx talks. She splits her time between Los Angeles and Shanghai. Emily, pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks, Ashley. Glad to be here.
First of all, we are going to cover a ton of things about the third culture. We're going to talk about Chinese brands going global. We're going to talk about consumers. But let's start with your own story. You've spent your career being the person in the room who understands both sides. You know, the third culture executive. But being a bridge is quite exhausting. You get walked on from both ends sometimes. So what's the most frustrating misconception you think that American executives have about China and vice versa today in 26?
That's a great first question. In fact, that was very lovely of you to say I understand both sides, because I think this is a truth in life. The more you see, the less you truly understand. So I would argue I don't really understand either side well enough. But what I have learned is that a lack of understanding can lead to assumptions. And assumptions then become stories that may or may not be grounded in truth or reality. And those stories are what cause divisiveness. The biggest lesson I have learned is to ask a question. A question like, is that true? Often lands softer than, well, I heard that. So questions like, is it true that China copies US tech? Is it true that US discriminate against Chinese? Those questions may land more as curious and open-minded than, I heard that. That's probably my biggest observation. And the framing of the question can diffuse the emotions in the room and lead to productive dialogue.
Now, let's talk about the tea and coffee. You ran marketing for Starbucks in China, and right now you're building Chagee in America. So both are selling this beautiful daily ritual in a cup. But tea and coffee carry completely different cultural weight. So what does a cup of tea mean to a Chinese consumer that a cup of coffee simply cannot mean for an American one? And can that meaning be exported? What's your take on that?
I think they are very different beverages. Well, one is a couple hundred years old, one is thousands of years old. Coffee is fast, tea is generally slow. Coffee is a morning jolt of efficiency, whereas tea is enjoyed slowly throughout the day. In fact, even think about how the products are prepared. Coffee beans are roasted under intense heat until they pop. Tea leaves slowly dry under the gentle warmth of the sun and air. So in fact, they're very different products, and they are consumed at very different occasions and even in different day parts. Tea definitely has a cultural context in China that it may not yet have in the US. But what that means to me is that there's actually a ton of white space to introduce it to American consumers in a really meaningful way. And I think for me, one of the reasons I was interested to take on this role is that Chagee is not only introducing a beverage, we're introducing the benefits of that beverage, exactly to your question. And in the US, as I've come back after living in China for over a decade, I truly believe this is the perfect time to share that daily tea ritual in the United States. We are absolutely seeing a trend of consumers wanting to move more towards spending their time intentionally, moving away from drinking too much coffee all day, drinking too much alcohol at night. And that is the perfect place where tea can come in.
And it's quite interesting because recently there's been a huge popularity boom in China when it comes to coffee. I mean, Shanghai,
Yes.
by the number of coffee shops, is, I believe, number 1 in the world, right?
And Fulu. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. And when it comes to tea, like in my office, and then we have offices in Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Shanghai, I am the only person who drinks tea. So
Okay.
the young consumers, I would say, in China kind of moved on, and the tea seems a little bit more old school, or a bit less exciting. And if it is tea, it's less traditional green tea, but more of a mixture of various flavors, I don't know, lychee plus lemon plus, I do not know, berries. When in the West right now we have overall, this big China maxing trend, right? People are drinking hot water, exploring tea, Tai Chi, and whatever. Why is that? Are young people just looking for something different, or is it, are we going to close the loop and they are going to find that heritage and connection with tea again?
That's a great question. I think what this speaks to fundamentally is the globalization of the consumer. You know, I was talking with my daughter who's about to go to college, and I was saying, what you are experiencing today is so different than what I experienced as a teenager in the 80s. We didn't have social media. So right now, a young person in Shanghai sitting on Anfulu can experience the exact same trend that an American can be experiencing sitting in southern Los Angeles. And what that means to me is there is a joint curiosity. And it goes back to the first question of, are we asking great questions? Are we curious about the world around us? So perhaps young Chinese are interested in coffee because they see the predominance of it in the Western world. They want to understand it, and they're interested to explore things they didn't grow up with. Meanwhile, Americans are realizing perhaps they drink too much coffee, perhaps too much alcohol, and they're looking for different experiences. And to your point, looking at this becoming Chinese trend is a great example of that. Perhaps it started with Red Note refugees, and it has continued to evolve into a curiosity. Now, I know there are some comments around cultural misappropriation, and perhaps there is some of it. But at a deeper level, I would like to believe that this comes from a place of curiosity and a desire to understand another's culture.
You have authored a book which is called The Spare Room, and it's about you building that social legacy, the impact you leave on people around you. Can you talk about that book and that philosophy that has been guiding you throughout your career?
Thank you for asking that. Yes, I started to write this book, The Spare Room, all about telling these stories of now 18 kids, young people, babies, vulnerable people who have needed a safe place to live. And we had the privilege, with my job moving us all over the world, of caring for these kids. And then when I was doing my first TEDx talk, what they challenged me on was, think deeper. Is your story really about the spare room? Are you encouraging people to open their room? And I realized that's not the deep idea. The idea we're sharing is everybody has a social legacy. The construct of that is, imagine a simple Venn diagram. For those of us who grew up as engineers, everything is either an XY axis or a Venn diagram, isn't it? And so on one circle, you've got the offer. This is your unique combination of personality, experiences, success traits. And then on the other hand, the other circle is your offense. And that would be the thing you see in the world that speaks to you more than anything else, that stops you in your tracks and you say, that is not okay. I've got to do something about it. If you're able to articulate your offer and your offense, put those two circles together, and that intersection in between is what I call your social legacy. So legacy is your ability to leave something better than you found it, and social defines the space in which you want to have that impact. And I think it's exactly the same whether it's at home, in your spare room, or it's at work, in the impact that you want to have. Because we are at our best at work when we're clear about our offer and we know what we bring to the table. We know what our experiences are, we're confident in our skills. And when we aim that set of our offer at a suitable opportunity, I think we unleash our best. And that's where we thrive. And when we thrive, we do our best work, and it just becomes this beautiful upward cycle.
Let's then switch back again and talk about the Chagee. So many Chinese companies are going global today, and Chagee is one of those. But the journey is not always easy and straightforward. And Chagee stock, for example, has dropped significantly on NASDAQ after its IPO. There's been a brutal price war also in China on the ground, where competitors are practically giving away milk tea, let's say. And you are in LA opening tea houses and partnering with creators and, you know, as you said just now before the interview, visiting competitors and trying to understand what makes local consumers click. So
Yes.
How are you figuring out this China going global story for your brand and for broader, let's say, Chinese brands that are exploring international markets?
Well, let me pause and connect these two questions because they seem disconnected, but they actually have a red thread, which is my boss who recruited me, Jay, in Chinese, his name is Junjie, has an incredible social legacy of his own. You know, when I first connected with him, I had just very publicly, by the way, declared that I was going to retire from paid work to focus on my next book, to focus on spending time with my daughter who was graduating. And when I met him, he asked me, why would you want to do that now? You seem to have a lot of energy. And I said, yes, the social legacy idea really speaks to me, and I want to leave as much positive impact as I can in this world. If I dedicate full time to that, perhaps I can do exactly that. And he said, "Do you know my background?" And I said, "With respect, no offense, but I don't, because I am not interviewing, because I'm not interested in a job." And he told me his story about how he was orphaned at 10, how he was living on the streets until he was 17. We ended up, both of us, with tears in our eyes. I said, "I cannot believe what you have overcome." And he said, "I cannot imagine what my life would have been if I had met an auntie, an IE like you when I was young." And I was so touched. And he said, "This is what I want to do." You know, as we have tears in our eyes, he said, "Emily, I want to build a 100-year brand in 100 countries. I want to create something that lasts." And he had such conviction. My goosebumps all rose. And I thought, you know what? I will do this. I will do this for him. This job, because I took a step down from a CEO role into a CCO role. I am here purely for social legacy. I want to support this incredible man in his vision. In fact, he's the third founder I've worked for, but working directly with, and he's 32 years old and so passionate in the beginning of his journey. So if I go back to what you were asking about in terms of the opportunity he sees, I guess I don't want to put words in his mouth, but here's how I sort of see the global opportunity for Chaji. We're quite saturated in China with over 7,000 tea houses. Asia Pacific continues to grow. Many different countries are opening. And then in North America, I think everybody understands you've got to establish in North America as a global brand. If you want to be seen as a global brand. Now, there are, to your point, a lot of Chuhai brands, so these brands that are going abroad out of China. I think here's what I would say about our positioning, and I have the deep privilege of defining that global brand positioning. We are proudly from Yunnan, where tea was born, and yet we are not a Chinese brand. We are a global brand. And I think that differentiation is what motivates me and drives me, because my boss's vision is to create a 100-year brand in 100 countries. That means our job is to land this brand here, proudly from Yunnan, and yet created for the world.
In your experience so far, what has been the single most important rule from maybe the old Western playbook that is still applicable today, or that the Chinese brands must throw out completely or follow? And how ultimately can they be a bit more successful in this journey?
Well, my initial reaction goes to what can we learn from the West and the East? And actually, I sort of corrected myself even as I was listening to your question, because I would say the number one rule for any business, regardless of where you're based, regardless of your industry or who you're trying to reach out to and engage, is meeting the customer where they're at. I mean, for us, what that means is we have to invite our consumers to learn about our tea and its benefits. They are our guests, and they are our potential guests. And this also speaks to your earlier question about the opportunity for tea in America. It's huge, as long as we remember. This is an age-old thing that everybody has to remind themselves of when they are in the business of marketing. We are not the consumer. We understand so much more than they do, no matter what, because that is our job. As long as we remember, tea is still new to a lot of American consumers. The tea that we are offering in particular. And then we invest our time, we invest our resources, and we meet them where they're at and bring them along the journey. We have to think about what tea is. Now, there is a lot of tea sold in North America. Don't get me wrong. There's RTD, a bottle of pure tea or Lipton's tea. There is tea bags that's brewed at home, right? That's plop, just add water. And there might be an iced tea that you order at a restaurant along with your lunch. In the South, there is sweet tea. There are lots of different types of tea, but understanding the occasion and who's drinking that particular type of tea can help inform the way that we speak to them about our tea, so that they can understand what it is that we offer, what it is that might be familiar, that they're very drawn to, and what it is that's different and unique that they might be curious about.
What is, in your experience, the most counterproductive leadership lesson you've learned so far? Something that contradicts maybe something that a business school teaches, but that you find true, apart from the fact that you need to be a joyful leader and have fun and open your own living room to host your team and really bring that community to life?
You know, what came to mind is an image. I think we are often taught about the learning curve, right? It goes from lower left to upper right. The idea that you will slowly start to earn your way up this learning curve. You will start to master skills. You will amass these new experiences. They're going to make you better, and you'll become wiser. And then somehow you will be at the peak. I think that is counterintuitive today. There is no peak. I think when we learn, perhaps we don't even learn up. Perhaps we learn sideways. Perhaps we join different industries. Perhaps what we're doing right this very minute is disrupted by AI, and then we have to relearn it in a completely new way. I think that idea of starting to grow, ascend, and crest is not real. I've now worked since 99, so 27 years. I've worked in a couple of industries. I grew very quickly in my career, and then I purposely took the step back to support Jay as the CCO. Wherever I've been, sometimes it's gone left, sometimes it's hiked up pretty quickly, pretty high, and now I've chosen to come back to this role. It's no longer about a linear path. And I think we unshackle ourselves when we no longer force ourselves into that paradigm. Look, you are who you want to be. What is your desired thing to learn? What is your desired end state? How do you want to leave this world? It's probably not with a title. That's not going to matter at the end. What was that book that the nurse wrote, The 5 Regrets Before Dying? You know the things that are going to matter to you. Are you invested in those things? And how do you structure your life in the micro and the macro moments to enable you to deliver that desired end goal? It's probably no longer a linear line.
When it comes to work culture, so American companies, I imagine, work very differently and operate differently. And to be a senior leader in a firm like this also requires a unique set of skills and approaches versus a Chinese company. So do you see a lot of differences, and what are they? For example, you earlier said that Jay had this vision for 100 years. In my experience, a lot of Chinese companies, be it AI startups or be it Alibaba or be it Chagee, they all have a very long-term vision. Typically, they think in decades or, again, 100 years terms. And for a lot of maybe American companies, that might or might not be the case, right? So in your experience building those global brands, but coming from a very distinct, let's say, American and Chinese culture, are there a lot of differences? Or today, it does not matter. Everybody is very equal.
I do think there are still differences. It goes back to perhaps the root and the wings. Our roots are different between China and the US. And certainly for every other country, but I can speak to that with my own personal experience. I think Dan Brown wrote a beautiful book. And the core premise is that America is led by lawyers and China is led by engineers. So America may be very good at building scaffolding, and China knows how to leverage it very quickly. I think that mindset does make sense. The other thing that my uncle wrote in one of his earlier books, AI Superpowers, is this always landed with me. He said, culturally in China, when you see something that works, you think, game on. I am going to immediately copy that. I see this small stall on the street that is selling the hell out of toilet lids. I am going to put a stall right next to them that sells toilet lids, and I'm going to go get a piece of that business. And there's no shame in it, because the idea of copying and iterating and optimizing means everybody wins, the pie grows, and we all get rich. In the States, I remember he used an example in the book where he said Groupon I think that might have been the example. Somebody came up with this brilliant idea for group coupons. And do you know how the reaction was? It was not game on. The reaction was, great job. Wow, you came up with a good idea. Congratulations. And those are two very fundamentally different reactions to success. One is game on, everybody in, and it becomes a race. And you know what? When we're all racing and scrabbling and trying to iterate and optimize, wow, how quickly we develop. Versus that mindset of, wow, we will recognize the winner. That is something really good, but I don't want to copy it. I don't want to do exactly that. I will go do something else. So I do think those couple examples demonstrate a little bit differently the base from which we come. However, that said, you see a lot of agility in the US now, perhaps much more than, when I started at Procter & Gamble, for instance. And then you see a lot more thoughtfulness and strategizing for the long term in China, to your point.
For our listeners out there, how can they follow you? Where do you want to direct them if they would like to continue this conversation with you, continue this journey? And maybe also, how can they continue following Chagee's development globally and bringing tea?
Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Emily Chang Chaji CCO. That's easy. You can find me personally on socials at spareroom.emilychang. The website is social-legacy.com. And we do have different Chaji apps and we have different social handles. So look for the Chaji USA to see what we're doing here in North America. And of course, we have our mini program in China.
Absolutely. And if you have not experienced the Chaji yet, I do recommend you checking them out. And if there's any new exciting developments, I'm sure, when it comes to the third space reinvention, Chaji is going to be a part of that story. Thank you, Emily, for today. We are looking forward to 2030 vision and more voices joining together, building this new global story. Thank you so much for being this voice for all of us.
Thank you, Ashley.